It wasn't a major accident, was it? I'm going on a trip now. So, take care of things there. When I heard my dad was hospitalized, I was taken aback. I had hoped my mother-in-law would come with me. But she left for her trip anyway. A week passed, and my mind was filled with these events, leaving my husband and I bewildered. Then, with no knowledge of what transpired, my mother-in-law came back with great energy. To her I said, "Your husband's funeral is over." She clutched her head, lost and confused by my words. My name is Catherine Turn. I'm turning 30 this year. I live with my husband Bob and my dad. I lost my mom at a young age, so my dad raised me, his only daughter. When getting married, I didn't want to leave my father alone. Bob happily agreed to this sentiment. Thanks to that, he came to live at my family home as a son-in-law. This year marks our 5th wedding anniversary. Hey Bob, let's go out for drinks this weekend. Found a great place. Is that so? Well, just don't drink too much, okay? If you get too drunk, it'll be hard for you to get home. Watching them talk and laugh together, there are moments they seem just like a real father and son. While Bob is a bit introverted, he's kind and friendly to everyone. My dad seems to appreciate that, which makes me happy. However, not everyone is happy about their bond. Enter my mother-in-law, Mary Matson. She seemed displeased that her precious son was living at his wife's family home. I can understand her feelings to some extent, but it was Bob's decision. Honestly, I wish she'd accept it. From the start of our marriage, whenever she visited, she never missed a chance to throw shade my way. Bob has married into your family, but he's still my son in every way that matters. No matter how many years pass, this line is always her opener. Then she continues with, "And remember, Catherine, you're not a guest when you're at your husband's family home. Help out with the chores." Saying this, she'd have me do everything from cleaning to cooking. But honestly, I never felt like I was just a visitor there. I carried out my duties without complaints, which probably annoyed her since she ran out of things to criticize. However, when it came to cooking, I'd always check in on how she preferred things. "Mary, how's the seasoning for the stew?" Without a word, she'd start adjusting it. Yet, she never missed an opportunity to critique. "This is nothing like our family's recipe. How could you make me taste this? Start over," she'd say, clearly displeased, and would then try to discard what I made. I always got angry at this behavior, but I could never speak up. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't know what she'd say next. Yet, in moments like these, my father-in-law would intervene. "Catherine put a lot of effort into that. How would you feel if someone tossed out your hard work?" "Well, it's not seasoned right. And it's too salty. Not good for our health." No matter how much he defended me, she wouldn't listen. I never intended to make the food overly salty. In fact, I often aimed for a lighter taste, adding more seasoning little by little. But she'd always find something to complain about. Bob sometimes stood up for me, but this only aggravated Mary more. "You don't need to say that much, Mom. You're going overboard. Mind your own business." Bob always got silenced like that by his mother. Yet later, he'd apologize, saying, "Sorry for not speaking up." I'd always smile and reply to Bob, "It's all right." I always felt that she was just bitter, thinking I stole her son away. So I believed she was just making life hard for me out of spite. Once I started thinking that way, I decided not to let her words get to me. And the fact that Bob and my father-in-law would stand up for me became my encouragement. But even though I tried not to let it affect me, if I kept hearing the same things every time I went to their house, it would still break my spirit. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. Even now, whenever I visit their house, she never fails to make snide comments at me. I've become good at brushing off most of what she says, so now her only remarks are about my cooking. She'd hint with a smile, suggesting she's about to start with her sarcasm. "How do you even manage to season the food this way? Odd, isn't it? I cook just how you told me to." I'd retort, matching her tit for tat. After 5 years, I'm not the pushover I used to be. At the start of our marriage, I was more reserved and there were many things I wanted to say but didn't. But now, given my nature, I've been speaking up more. Not that it would make her back down, and her remarks towards me didn't cease. In fact, they became even worse. One day, she surprisingly praised my cooking. "Oh, it turned out quite decent today. But there's still room for improvement." I was puzzled by her comment, yet took it as rare praise. That's when Bob intervened. "Actually, it's always good." Seeing her reaction to his words, she was visibly upset. And then, as always, the snarky comments began. "Don't get ahead of yourself just because I complimented you. I haven't changed anything. I made it how you said. I'm actually grateful for your advice." She gave a grimace and then spoke. "Oh, scary. Young wives these days talk back a lot." And with that, she left the room. Lately, I've not only been talking back, but also not feeling as affected by her words. But there was one topic that always got to me. The fact that we didn't have kids even after 5 years of marriage. Whenever she ran out of comebacks, she'd always bring that up. "I've been wanting to see my grandchild, but it seems that's still far off. When will that be?" I'd be at a loss for words against such comments. Indeed, not having children after 5 years does bring concerns. But I believe the more you rush things, the harder they get. So even though I try not to let it affect me, it still hurts when she brings it up. It was becoming a real source of stress for me. Then one day, she called me out of the blue. "Mary, what's the urgency?" I was puzzled by the sudden call. Then, the mother-in-law responded with a gleeful look on her face. "Oh, didn't I tell you? I'm going on a trip with my friends. I've been planning this for a while. I'll be back in about a week. Please take care of the house." I was shocked, as I hadn't heard anything about a trip. But then I realized something and asked. "It looks like you've packed only for yourself. Isn't your husband going?" "He's staying home. I'm going with my friends. Why would I bring him? So please take care of him." That's unexpected. Just as I was about to retort, my phone rang. However, I didn't recognize the number, so I initially ignored it, but the calls kept coming. Suspicious, I decided to answer. To my surprise, it was a police officer. "Is this Mrs. Catherine Turn's phone?" "Yes, it is." Wondering why the police were calling, I answered the question. Then I was told a shocking truth. Apparently, my father had been in a serious car accident and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I was even told he was unconscious. No way, my dad. Overwhelmed by shock, I crouched down right where I was. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Seeing me like that, my mother-in-law spoke up. "What happened all of a sudden?" "My dad's been in a car accident and was taken by ambulance." As I responded through my tears, she unexpectedly said, "Oh, that's all?" "What do you mean, that's all? They said he's unconscious. Can't you come with me? I feel so alone right now." I begged desperately, but she frowned and replied, "I can't do that. It's probably not a big deal anyway. Besides, I gotta go on a trip now. You handle your stuff on your own. Take care of everything, okay?" "I can't believe." I tried to plead again, but she grabbed her bags and left the house. I thought, what if something happens to my dad? What should I do now? Then my father-in-law gently put his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, "Let's go to the hospital first. I'll be there with you." Seeing the kind smile on his face, I felt relieved. So, together with him, I headed to the hospital. Once we arrived and were guided to my father's room, tears once again welled up in my eyes. After a while, Bob also rushed to the hospital. Instead of the distraught me, my father-in-law explained the situation, even mentioning my mother-in-law's trip. "Catherine, don't worry about anything now. Stay by your dad's side. I can manage things at home by myself. Don't stress out. Thank you so much," I managed to say, overwhelmed with gratitude. And so, I kept a sleepless vigil by my unresponsive father's side. A week went by, and after dinner, Bob and I quietly drank some tea. Our minds were full, trying to process the events of the past few days. Then, unaware of our state, my mother-in-law came home cheerfully. "I'm back. Sorry for being so late. I planned to be home earlier, but there was a lot of traffic. She spoke gleefully, but Bob and I remained silent, looking down. Still, she continued. The spa trip was so fun. Oh, and I got souvenirs for both of you. My cheerful mother-in-law didn't notice our mood, and it seemed like she wouldn't stop talking anytime soon. Well, I went to the beach, and the ocean looked so beautiful from the room. But the sea itself was also beautiful. It was really nice. We should all go together next time. However, noticing something was off, she looked around with a puzzled expression. Speaking of which, where's my husband? The house was locked, so I thought he was here. Dad's not here. I have the keys. Bob finally responded to the mother-in-law's query, though he looked tense. Why do you have the house keys, Bob? The mother-in-law asked, appearing clueless. With a straight face, Bob replied. It's hard to explain here. Let's go home and talk. Saying this, Bob picked up the car keys and his mother-in-law's luggage and headed to the car. I nodded in agreement with Bob's words, followed him without saying anything else. Unaware of our heavy mood, the mother-in-law was still in high spirits. And perhaps still in a holiday mood, she continued to chat happily in the car. The food was amazing since we were by the sea. Most of it was seafood, but the sashimi was particularly delicious. There were so many fresh fish, I wanted you guys to see it. She continued talking non-stop all the way to the house. A trip that took less than 30 minutes by car. But listening to her in silence was tough. But I couldn't stop the mother-in-law who was talking so joyfully. No, that's not it. I just didn't have the energy. Then, equally silent till now, an annoyed Bob finally spoke up. Mom, can you keep it down a bit? I'm trying to drive here. Hearing Bob's words, she pouted like a child and began to talk back. What? I'm just trying to keep the mood light since you're driving in the dark. Catherine isn't saying anything either. What's wrong with enjoying a drive? Hearing her response, I was left speechless out of exasperation. Bob, probably feeling the same way, let out a deep sigh. However, unable to bear it any longer, he shouted. Mom, just be quiet. I don't want to hear your stories right now. The mother-in-law looked genuinely shocked at Bob's tone. And then, with a puzzled look on her face, she began to speak. Why are you so angry? Just trying to concentrate on driving. Please, just be quiet for now. Perhaps understanding, the mother-in-law finally fell silent. We then spent the rest of the trip in silence. A few minutes later, we finally arrived at the family home. And as Bob unlocked the front door, he entered the house. I'm home. It feels good to be back. There's no place like home. The mother-in-law said, relieved, as soon as she entered the house. But when the lights turned on, she noticed something was amiss. She quietly began to speak. Wait, where is he? He wasn't at your place either. Saying this, she called out for her husband multiple times. But there was no response, and the mother-in-law came up with an optimistic theory. He's probably mad because I went on the trip without consulting him. He must have gone on a solo trip out of anger. That's why you guys couldn't tell me, right? I was growing tired of her cheerful assumptions. And I wondered how she could come up with such ideas. At that point, an exasperated Bob responded. Dad went on a long trip by himself. See? When's he coming back? She asked Bob without a hint of doubt in her voice. I couldn't stay silent any longer and tried to steady myself before speaking. He's not coming back. What do you mean? Is he that mad? Realizing she still didn't grasp the situation, I led her to a specific room. As she entered, she stood in shock and disbelief. Is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke. We've already held Dad's funeral. The mother-in-law, now grasping the gravity of the situation, asked what had happened. He was in a car accident. I replied, tears forming in my eyes. At Bob's words, my mother-in-law began to recall and speak. There was that car accident. Remember? Catherine's dad was rushed to the hospital. And on that day, wasn't your father here too? After that, my dad woke up. He's still hospitalized, though. Hearing my words, My mother-in-law seemed lost and held her head, saying she didn't understand. I then explained what happened afterward. On the day my dad was taken to the hospital, my father-in-law accompanied him. I was by my unconscious father's side, taking care of him all the time. Concerned about my father and me, my father-in-law visited us daily. And a few days later, when my dad finally woke up, both my father-in-law and I were overjoyed. We had plans to go out for drinks once he was discharged. But then, on our way back, I tried to speak calmly, but I was overwhelmed with emotion and couldn't continue. Bob took over for me. Dad was apparently taken to the same hospital as Catherine's father. Catherine saw him being brought in by ambulance by chance and let me know. I rushed there immediately, but it was already too late. Why did that happen? My mother-in-law, taken aback by our story, seemed lost for words. However, a visibly distressed Bob quickly changed his demeanor and spoke up. What were you doing all that time, Mom? I tried contacting you multiple times. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. My mother-in-law looked baffled by Bob's questioning. Seeing her like this, Bob's expression remained unchanged. We get it. No one expected this to happen. That's right, isn't it? We're all in the same boat, right? But as my mother-in-law tried to reason, Bob stared her down. Then tell me, why was your cell phone off? What? I mean... Hearing Bob's words, the mother-in-law turned pale. Yet, undeterred by her reaction, Bob continued speaking. I kept calling, but your phone was always off. And when I finally thought I got through, no answer. You didn't even call back. What's that about? My mother-in-law was at a loss for words. And she stayed silent. But Bob wasn't finished. Why didn't you tell us you were going on a trip in advance? Who are you planning to go with? At least tell us where you're headed. Sure, you're an adult and don't need to tell us everything, but we would have liked to know, especially given what happened. Bob shared our feelings on the matter. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law responded. I went on a trip with a friend. But as far as I know, I contacted all your friends. None of them were with you. They even said they didn't know where you went. Bob kept pressing for answers. I've made new friends recently. Ones you don't know about. She seemed determined to counter Bob's accusations. But Bob wasn't backing down. Is this him? Bob asked, showing her a photo of a man walking arm in arm with my mother-in-law. Seeing the picture, her face went pale. He's just a drinking buddy. Not the one I traveled with. Bob replied with a meaningful tone. Seems like you're quite close for just a drinking buddy. There's nothing between us. Sure, we're close, but not in the way you're implying. Why the act? You think we don't know? Even my dad knew. Unable to hold back his frustration with his evasive mother, Bob finally raised his voice. Do you still deny anything with him, even after seeing this? Bob thrust another photo at her, showing the two of them entering a hotel. The sight made her shiver. Why do you have this? It seemed that my mother-in-law realized she couldn't deny it any longer and timidly asked. I found a diary when I was going through Dad's belongings. It was inside. Bob calmly began to explain. He told her about the diary and how it mentioned the person in the photograph. His dad had known for quite some time that his wife had been having an affair but never confronted her. In fact, the diary even mentioned that he felt he was the one to blame. Dad's diary didn't blame you or say a single bad thing about you. Bob said. I'm so sorry. I did go on a trip with him. I never thought it would lead to this. I'm truly sorry. She apologized with tears in her eyes after understanding the gravity of her actions. I'm sorry to both of you. Please forgive me. I won't ever see him again and I'll change my ways. The mother-in-law pleaded while crying. However, Bob replied firmly. Even if Dad forgave you, I will never. Hearing this, the mother-in-law collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Yet, we left her there and exited the house. Later, Bob told us about a local bar that was mentioned in his father's diary. He went there and discreetly asked around. Apparently, The mother-in-law hadn't been meeting with the man she traveled with. They had both been hiding the fact that they were married and decided to part ways without any arguments. However, neighbors and friends found out about her affair and the fact she skipped her husband's funeral for a romantic getaway. They shunned her, and this hurt led her to sell her house and move away. On my end, I still struggled to cope with my father-in-law's passing. But my spirits were lifted when my dad got discharged from the hospital. We reminisce about my father-in-law almost daily. "I'm gonna go out for a drink soon. I had promised Bob's dad we'd have a drink together after he got better, so I'll bring his photo along," my dad said cheerfully. "Please ensure you're fully healed before you go out. We don't want you sleeping just anywhere," Bob responded with concern. "Nah, I'm fine. I'm not gonna sleep just anywhere with Bob's dad's photo." He chuckled, not taking my plea seriously. Yet, he looked genuinely happy. To be honest, I hadn't found much to smile about since my father-in-law passed away. But lately, I've found myself laughing a bit more. Probably due to these light-hearted conversations. There's another piece of joyous news too. I'm pregnant. And as I want my father-in-law to rest in peace, I aim to regain my happiness bit by bit. I can't remain sad forever, especially now that I have a child on the way.